Okay, test. Can you guys hear me? Virtual land?
Yes, can hear you.
Can somebody give me a thumbs up out there in virtual world in the chat or something like that? Make sure you guys can hear me. Hello, hello.
We can hear you.
All right, sounds like they're having some. So Michael, you can hear me, right?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Can anyone speak in virtual land so we make sure we can hear you guys?
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can somebody give me a
I think
sound check
I
in
think it's
virtual
just
land?
I can hear you, Michael.
Oh, morning.
You can't hear.
Okay, let's go here. Why can't we hear them? Must be something in the settings over here. I might have messed that up when I set it up. Share computer sound. What is going on? Let's try it now. Somebody.
You hear me, Ben?
Hello?
Sorry about that. My name is Ben Williams. I am a Texas broker in El Paso, Texas, run a team called the War Team. Today, we're going to do an overview of the 1 to 4 family contract. If you're an agent wanting to get involved with our brokerage, contact me and we can have a conversation. If you're in El Paso, Texas, or in Houston, we are open in those 2 locations. We got some people in the room here. We got people on Zoom. And let's jump into this training. The 1 to 4 family resale contract. It is used exactly what it says. If you're reselling a home that's not under a new construction situation, it is supposed to be used in this form here, the resale contract form. The 1 to 4 family is for dwellings from 1 to 4. So duplexes, triplexes, and a quadruplex. This is what you use. Okay, let's talk about the first section. Real easy. First section is the parties. Typically what you want to have there, as much as you possibly can, if you have sister and brother buying a home, you can spell out the name sister, whoever the sister's name is, and you could put sister and brother. You could do that, right? If it's spouses, most time we don't do that. Just put the name of the spouses and that's it. Do you have to do that? No. It's not really required, but if you want to be in the details, if you're having a relationship of the parties and you want to make sure distinguish what that is, you can put that out there. So just something that you most times it's not really commonly used, but you can specify if you have a sister, brother, or something like that, daughter, father, you could do that. All right, you just can't put dad.
If it's brother-in-law,
You can specify. All right, it's not going to hurt for you to specify. What I'm trying to tell you is that what is allowed, you can put that in there. And before I even go into that, we often are asked as real estate agents or realtors to give advice on forms not promulgated by TREC or Texas Realtors. Technically, you're not supposed to give advice on a form. Let's say you have some seller who is selling their own properties. They have their own contract, such as a builder, all right? We train you on promulgated forms. TREC has trained you on promulgated forms when you went to school and things of that nature. You're not really supposed to give advice, okay? And that's going to happen to you oftentimes, all right? You're going to get some people that's going to like, hey, I want to use this contract. I want to use that. It's not that they can't use it. I don't want you saying that, oh, you can't use that, because that's not true. But it comes down to if you're able to give advice on this form. All right, so that's at least from my perspective to y'all able to give advice. If you get in those situations where other forms are being used, yeah, it can be done. You just got to be very cautious to give advice. Now, as you get into these forms more and more, you get deeper into them, you're going to find out that you know a lot of different things about it. Once you see a form, you'll see all this stuff that comes out and you'll be like, oh man, that's crazy. Or you can see the builders contracts is really designed around the builders. There's a lot of outs for the builders on their contracts, more so than there are outs for the sellers on these contracts. Buyer heavy based in this contract. Okay, you'll see that as we go on. But I just want to make sure we talk about that. This is just something that's my opinion and it's how I see it, but let's keep going. So the parties, you put the parties in there. This is a walkthrough, right? Section 2. Here, I'm going to give examples here. You're probably going to see something that's going to be like lot 2, You put the number 2 in there. And the block would be like, hey, 166, right? And then you have this legal nomenclature, a name, right? And as you look at this, I'll give you an example. Actually, let's go to that part real quick. Let's go to subdivision. Get one pretty easy, right? Let's go 7799. So every listing, they're gonna have the legal description. If you see it right here, it says legal. When you see that first number, it's gonna say block 11. This portion right here says Campo del Sol 1B. In this case, this portion right here would go into the contract here. All right, so that's how that's broken up, okay? In addition, up here, whatever city is in, you put El Paso, in this case right here. And then what county, most likely probably El Paso or Doña Ana. And then known as, this is where you actually put the actual address. So in this case, we're just gonna imagine that this is here. We probably come back over here and copy the address and put this in there, what it's known as, right? All right, any questions about the portion A? We're good, okay. Portion B. All right, portion B, improvements. All right, this is really important that you understand this. Improvements basis says, okay, anything permanently installed or built to the property is supposed to be considered part of the sale, it's supposed to convey. And then they give you a list of items down there. And if you get into this space, the list of items is appliances, screens, shutters, awnings, wall-to-wall carpeting, mirrors, and stuff like that. There's a reason why they put all that stuff in there. You know why they put that stuff in there? Because someone probably took the carpet. There's a reason when y'all see stuff like that, it's because someone actually came in and took the carpet one day. All right, and that's how these things happen. So they're telling you all these different things that's supposed to be part of the sale. If it's attached to the property, they're supposed to convey with the sale. All right, now I'm going to get into this space. I've told this story probably millions of times. I've had to pay for a pergola. Back in 2017, I went to a listing presentation, talking to a seller, and the seller told me, hey, I'm taking my pergola. I was like, okay, cool. Didn't register to me whatsoever. Came to closing day. Buyer did their walkthrough, and the buyer's agent sent me a picture of the concrete boats where the pergola was attached to the concrete, and they're like, hey, where my pergola at? But again, the seller told me, hey, I'm taking my pergola, right? And so I remember the conversation. I called the seller. I said, hey, man, where the pergola at? He said, I told you I was taking my pergola. So guess who had to go buy a pergola? I had to go buy a pergola and give a buyer a $600 pergola. I tell you that it was the fact that it was bolted to the ground, right? And me being green at the time, I was really green at that time, not even thinking, right? So that stuff really matters when you start doing these contracts. Just think about that stuff. So I usually describe in a listing presentation, it changed my whole listing presentation. Now when I go in a listing presentation, I say, hey, you see that TV? You see the mounts? The mounts technically are supposed to stay with the house. You can take your TV, but the way this reads, that mount to that, it's mounted to the wall, is supposed to stay with the house. So we start having conversations like that. So when you're looking around the house in the listing presentation, you should start looking at the house totally different. You'll be looking at water softeners. You'll be looking at stuff that you like, are they taking that with them? When you sit down at the kitchen table and start having a conversation with the sellers, you're going to say, okay, look, this, that, what do you think? What do you plan on doing with that? If you go in there and if we've been in situations where, hey, we want this chandelier, we're going to take the chandelier. Can you take the chandelier down before we put it on the market and replace it with something else? That's the best time, because once people see it, they want it. And it could be a factor into the negotiations to prevent it from happening if they don't see it. So think about those things. If you see stuff affixed to the house or built into the house, and as you go through the listing presentations, you should start to identify those things. Now, let's say it does happen and say, hey, I can't take that chandelier down, but they're not getting it. That should be in the exclusions when you actually do the writing, the confidential remarks. Hey, chandelier does not convey, all right? Speakers outside on the patio does not convey. You should start to have that type of language in your confidential remarks to make sure people don't get the idea that's going to be part of the sale, okay? When in doubt, write it out. Accessories has a whole bunch of things there. One of the biggest things I think of Aetna all the time when we look at accessories, because accessories, if you look in here, I want to make sure I see it. It says draperies and rods, right? Edna had a situation a few years. First time I ever saw Edna get mad and foaming at the mouth. She had a seller that took the drapes and rods. They were pretty expensive for them. That had the tall ceilings and they spent a lot of money for these drapes and they took it based on this contract that was supposed to stay. She never had the conversation with the seller and she ended up buying some drapes and rods. Okay. So things like that matters until you actually get into situations and you have a great real estate agent told me one time, until you pay for something, you really don't know. Until you get in that situation where you have to pay for something, you're going to really realize and you're going to look at these accessories very differently. And you're going to start looking at the house very differently. Okay. So take time to look at this. They got in there artificial fire logs, security systems, pool equipment, door keys, window shades, rods, blinds, all that stuff. That's supposed to be part of the sale unless identified that it's not. Okay. All right. In this contract, if you exclude any of those items in improvements or accessories, you would put it in D. All right. Everybody with me there? Any of these items up here, if you're going to exclude them, you're going to put it in D. All right. Let's keep on going. Again, it's a walkthrough. Sales price. Any portion that's going to be cash at the closing table, cash at the closing table, it has to be identified. So in this case, let's say, hey, I'm going to keep the math simple for a second. We got an FHA loan. The house is $200,000. Okay. So that would be $7,000 at 3.5%, right? So $7,000 would be here because that would be the cash down. The finance would end up being $193, right? So the total would come out to be $200,000. You have to do some math in here. Any portion of this, and if there's any third-party financing portion of this, you would have to click inside of here, click that box. If it was a seller finance situation, you have to do that, right? If it was a loan assumption situation, you have to click loan assumption, right? Whatever identifies that portion that they're going to be doing, it would have to be in that box B, all right? And the total sales price being in box C. Questions about that? All right.
Ben, can we go back to item 2 real quick?
Yes. Two.
2.
Yeah. Grab the mic. Pass the mic then.
Okay. Mic is on. So my question is, have you ever been asked to produce garage openers since the seller lost them?
Yeah.
Is it a courtesy or is it a have to?
The situation I had was that we were asked if they had garage door openers. We said yes. Kind of find out it was a no. Okay. So since we had said yes, we ended up producing garage door openers. Now, if we identified that the garage door openers are not going to be part of it and we put that out there, then we don't have to produce it. It's amazing how when you get to the end of a deal, the little small things like that could be so critical. A garage door opener has been
Pretty significant in there.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think about it, but it does become pretty significant. So if you're on the listing side of that, you can get out in front of that and make sure you have that conversation about garage door openers and keys and all this other stuff. You got to look at the house differently. And then on the buyer side of that, you got to ask the questions. But yeah, I have bought garage door openers. So, yeah. You bought some garage door openers?
I have, and I've bought garage door openers and I've had the seller buy garage door openers. They're universal. And then many times I've just said, we don't have them. And they accepted it. But there have been times where the buyer did not accept that answer.
The last deal, we didn't have them.
What if you only have one instead of two?
You just got to communicate. I think it's about communication. If you only have one, you just got to say it. If you're the listing agent and you know that they only have one or they don't have any, You should be putting it there in exclusions. Yeah, to prevent that from happening, all right, you should probably put it there. Leases, if there's any lease involved, you have to identify in here, residential lease or natural resource lease. If there is a lease, now where people go wrong with this one most times, especially when they're new, the solar panels, if the solar panels are going to be paid off at closing, but solar panels are already paid off and there's no lease on the solar panels, then you don't put a fixture lease. A lot of times when agents are new, they'll do a fixture lease for the solar panels and it's going to be paid off at closing. You don't need that, right? So make sure that's something that if you ever get a question about that, talk to me. If there's going to be any form of a lease, right, you got to have the fixture lease. Now you're going to ask me, okay, let's say the buyer is going to qualify to buy them afterwards. The solar panels are there. Buyer has to assume the loan, right? People ask that question a lot. No, that's different. They're assuming a loan to pay it off. But if there's any form of a lease on them where it's not going to be paid off, you would have to have that fixture lease on the solar panels. Okay. And these are the questions I get a lot of times. They're going to assume the loan and pay for it afterwards. Do we need a fixture lease? No, you don't. We'll talk about a lot of different times where solar panels come into play. If they're going to be paid off at closing, I get that question all the time. Where do we put that in the contract? And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay. Any questions about leases?
If the buyer is going to assume the lease, you don't need a fixture lease? You don't need to mark B?
If they're going to assume the fixture lease,
Correct.
yes, they're going to have to do that.
Oh, okay.
They're assuming a loan to pay it off. That's different. But anything with a lease where it's not going to be paid off,
Yeah.
you need the leases.
Got it.
Okay. Residential lease. Let's talk about residential lease. Some of the situations that we have with residential leases that I've seen in the past. Unfortunately, we live in El Paso, y'all. Unfortunately, we have a lot of situations where people are just living out back in some casita and there's no lease agreement with cousin such and such, or my mom lives back here. This is the reality that we live in. I want to talk about that particularly. If there is no lease, you're not required to have this, right? Based on TREC guidance, if there's no lease in place. But here's reality. If it's some type of situation where they don't have something in writing and you got a renter back there and it's some investment property that somebody's buying and there's nothing in place, there's got to be some stuff created. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Your buyer is buying some type of investment property. It has some renters in there, but they don't have nothing in writing. That's going to be a problem. And you need to get out in front of that quickly to start figuring this thing out. Because right now, the new buyer can't come in and implement leases prior to closing. That's got to be on the seller who's owning the property. That's the only person that can really put in place. But it's going to become a problem if the buyer buys it, there's no lease in place. You just got to be careful. That's the situations we get here. That's the real life situations that we have. And it doesn't really translate easily and it causes problems. Okay, so it's better to do it while you're in the contract versus not, right?
Yeah, Gabriel.
Yes, sir.
So you're saying if we have a client who's going to buy a house with an additional dwelling unit, like a casita, and they have a renter, a tenant in there, but they say the lease expired and they're just on a month-to-month. You're saying we should suggest that they create an active lease at that point to ensure
That's different because the way leases are, if the lease expires and they go month to month, there's something in place.
Okay,
I'm talking about there's never been nothing established.
gotcha.
There's never been nothing written whatsoever for these people to be living there and they're paying rent. There's no lease in place. But when a lease expires, most lease, if it does, when most leases expire, it has some verbiage in there about it automatically continues month to month, whatever. Most leases have that. So you
Right.
do have something in place.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
All right. Good question though. Let's jump to earnest money, all right? So earnest money, delivery of earnest money, an option fee. Big thing there is within 3 days after the effective date. Okay, 3 days after the effective date. That's the big thing. Buyers must deliver blank escrow agent, right? Whoever that may be, at whatever address. And then it says the earnest money will be X amount of dollars. Typically in our market, it can be up to 1%. In El Paso, I have not seen much more than 1%. Has anybody seen more than 1%? I have not seen it. We're lucky in that fashion because sometimes earnest money could be higher. Austin and some other locations, they have the norm of that market could be up to 2%. Earnest money is one of those things that a lot of times when new agents come here, they're like, oh, what should it be? Depending on what side you're on and what you're trying to do. If you're on the buyer side and you know your buyer's strapped for cash, you're trying to do the minimum amount you can get, make it happen. It could depend on if there's multiple offers going on in the markets, what the market's driving. So you just got to think about that. There's no set standard, but it could be up to 1%.
I've seen on the MLS, if it's a cash offer, it has to be a little bit more.
It doesn't have that word have to be, no.
Or they're requesting it on the MLS saying earnest money deposit 5% if it's a cash deal.
I've seen that.
Okay.
I've seen
these
that.
are for cheaper properties.
But typically it's up to 1%.
Okay.
Option fee. Typically in this market, we see between $50 and $250. Every now and then you may see more, but typically speaking, it's between $50 and $250.
I've seen on the MLS $100 per day.
$100 per day on option fee? I've never seen it. You ever seen it?
Because you had some rich people, you went out of town and I opened up the door for them. And they were trying to get this house and they put down like a couple of $1,000 for option fee. You remember them? They had a big black Cadillac Escalade. And George, can you open the door? Because I got to go out of town.
I remember that now. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I also have one here that the option fee, they demanded the buyer put $5,000 for option. That was really unique in the
I think that was
situation.
that's the $5,000.
Yeah. So that was a real unique situation. But typically speaking, about $50 to $250, typically speaking. All right. For the people that's new in here, I want you to go with that gauge. Okay. $50 to $250 if you're writing stuff down. All right. The next section there says section 5A1. Buyer shall deliver additional earnest money of blank to escrow agent within blank days after the effective date. This can be used, and I've seen it used. It's not uncommon. A lot of investors will ask the buyer's agent to use this block because they want to get in for the least amount of money possible. They're going to gauge this off of their option time. So being that they have a 7-day option, they may ask you to say, okay, we'll put $1,000 for earnest money up on day 8. They can go in and do their inspections within that 7 days, not put no earnest money up whatsoever. And on day 8, after they determine that they're going to go forward, that's when they want to put their earnest money up because now they want to put money to it. So that's where I've seen it in the past. Most times it is investors that do that. If I'm on the listing side of the house, okay, they're basically into this deal for $50 for an option or something like that, $25 for 7 days. They're not putting nothing up and they're doing an inspection just to see if they can get a trial run. It just depends on the situation. If I'm on the listing side of that, I'm going to advise my client. They're basically into this for $50, $25, and they get to do an inspection and all this other stuff. They're not putting no skin in the game whatsoever until they've done their due diligence. So that's something I would tell the seller. Okay, is that what you're comfortable with? Just depends on the situation, right? I'm not saying there's nothing right or wrong about it. I'm just telling you that on the other side of it, being the advisor or the hand on the shoulder with the seller, that's what you got to tell them. The seller may not understand that's what they're doing. Now, on the buying side, you're the buyer's agent and you're working for the investor. And it may be something that you advise your investor to do. So they don't have much skin in the game. So they can go do their due diligence and not put no earnest money up. You got to look at it from both lenses and see how that really shapes in your situation. I'm just here to tell you how it's used, and that's how I've seen it in the past. Okay. Section 5.2. This is a critical if the last day of the earnest money or option fee or additional earnest money falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the time of delivery of earnest money option fee or additional earnest money is applicable is extended to the next day that's not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. Okay. Let's just say, I hope I got my times right. Let's say the 4th of July is on a Monday and you execute the contract on Thursday. So Thursday is day 0, right? Friday is day 1. Saturday is day 2. Sunday is day 3. The next day is the 4th of July. Title comes to close. So that option money and earnest money wouldn't have to be until the 5th. You have that additional next day when it's not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. You have that additional day to get that earnest money in. Okay. Now, the next question is going to be, like I always get, hey, same contract. You're on the listing side. Put your listing hat on, right? And you execute on Thursday. And the next day, Friday, they haven't turned nothing in whatsoever, but they scheduled the inspection. So new agents, they'll be like, oh, no, you can't do that. That's absolutely incorrect. They can't. There's nothing in that contract stopping them to do the inspection. There's nothing saying that you have to have earnest money option money in this deal in order to do the inspection. So I'm just telling you guys, because I'm just hitting the common stuff that I get from a lot of new agents. And a lot of times people are like, oh, that's not right or whatever. So you look at it from both angles. If you're on the buying side of that, man, we could probably do this inspection before we even turn earnest money option money in, right? Now, to terminate, guess what has to be turned in? To have the unrestricted right to terminate, you have to have turned in. You have to have that option money in. So if you try and do all this stuff and then terminate before you put your option money in, you would have to wait till Tuesday, turn the option money in, then terminate. So just think about that for a second. Look at it from both angles, from the seller side, from the buyer side. Look at it from those different perspectives, because it just depends on what side you're on. Just think about that, right? Then it says the escrow agent receives on this paragraph shall be applied first to the option fee, right? Then the earnest money. Okay. So for example, let's say the earnest money was $1,000. The option fee was $100, right? Same scenario. On July 5th, they turn in $1,000. Based on that, of that $1,000, the first $100 of that is going to be towards what? The option fee. So they would only put $900 towards earnest money, meaning the earnest money is short, and that could cause the seller could terminate, all right, because the earnest money is short, and they could be well within the right, because you look at that, it says buyer authorized escrow agent to release, deliver option fee to seller anytime without further notice. That's about the option fee. Where's it at, George? Where I'm saying the seller can terminate if the earnest is short. I think it's going to be later down here.
They can terminate?
Yeah, the seller can terminate if the earnest money is not terminated.
Why they on B, failure to timely deliver earnest money, so C.
Okay.
But explain, if the contract is executed and the buyer terminates before 3 days, the buyer still owes option money. Or not.
Yeah.
They still owe that option money.
They still owe the option.
Yeah.
They do. Yep. That's the only way they can terminate for the unrestricted right.
Yeah.
And not be subject to paragraph 15. All right. So next thing, termination of option.
So who withdraws?
The buyer.
After execution, there's no such thing.
But they can't.
There's no such thing as withdrawal after execution. You can withdraw before execution.
Okay.
Right. Termination option for nominal consideration. The receipt of the seller acknowledges the buyer's agreement to pay the option fee within the time required. Seller grants the buyer the unrestricted right to terminate the contract given notice. You can see anywhere normally 5 to 12 days. If all utilities are on and I'm writing a contract and I know I could get my inspector out there and I'm not gonna have any problems, I'm probably gonna put 7. Okay, 7 is probably adequate, right? But if I walk in the house and there's no utilities on and it's a holiday, Thanksgiving and stuff like that going on, that may be 10 days. You just got to make that judgment call to make sure you got enough adequate time for your relationship with your inspectors. You know when they can get out there. You should have that pretty much down on that side. Typically speaking, anywhere between 5 to 12 days is what you see out here. This is the only timeline that has a timestamp that's not 11:59. The option ends at 5 p.m. When the option period ends, it's 5 p.m. That's critical. For this reason, this is the reason I always teach people when I write a contract for a buyer, I also have them sign a termination at the same time. I have them sign a buyer termination every time I write an offer because I'm not going to wait if the buyer wants to terminate and we're getting down to the last hours, like 3:59 or 4:59. I'm not going to be searching for a buyer. Let's say something happened, your buyer wants to terminate. We go through this whole process. The resolution of repairs are not really done. The listing agent is telling me, hey, we're going to send you the amendment. George is going to sit there. He's the listing agent on this side. He said, I'm going to send it to you. It's 4:30 p.m. George has not sent it. But you're riding on this faith that he's going to send it. If he never sends it, you've told your buyer it's good to go. He never sends it. 501, there's no resolution of repairs. 501, who should I look? The buyer. And 501, who could be considered negligent at 501 through TREC standards? The buyer's agent. You can ask everybody I've ever trained, and he's been here. I've been telling him this for a long time. Rob's been in situations, you told me to get the buyer. Tell y'all just in case, because you never know when you have to throw that out there. You could always re-enter in contract. I've had situations where I've sent the termination, and all of a sudden, they want to do the repairs now. But we terminated. I sent the termination. Now the listing agent and the seller says, okay, hey, yeah, we'll do the repairs. Perfect. We have to do the amendment to rescind the termination, but I got to get that repair amendment back and take that out. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I've literally had situations where we've got down to the wire and I'm not waiting to the 4:59. I'm telling people, hey, by noon that day, if you ain't got what we need, we're going to send a termination. I make that very clear to the listing agents. Hey, if I don't have what I need by 12, we're sending a termination. 12 noon, they're getting it. You'll find out some fun.
And they send you the termination basically. Like you send them the termination or the cancellation for the contract and they send you what they were missing after noon.
We terminate. Now there's things to go back and get back in contract, and that's a whole different process. At that time, when I send the termination, the contract is terminated. It's over.
So you can go back in contract with that particular transaction. It's just gonna be a new one.
So let's say George is a different brokerage. George is listing agent. I got the buyer. 12 noon today, I say, hey, man, I'm sending the termination because we ain't got a resolution of repairs. When I send that to him, the contract is done. It's terminated. Now, George come back, hey, my seller will do the repairs now. Okay. George and I will do an amendment to the contract where we'll specify in block 9, termination sent on Base Day is no longer in effect, and we're rescinding that. It has to be filed. Now, me and him, we can still move on without doing any new contract because we rescinded that termination.
Okay.
All right. I don't have to do no paperwork. I don't have to do nothing other than that one document to rescind it. And now we're back in contract. That has happened many times.
It's a power move.
It has happened many times. Sometimes it's an art of negotiation to get the repairs done in certain markets. Now, you couldn't do that during COVID because the seller would have been like, deuces, I got 15 more people sitting here waiting for you. But you might be able to do that today.
Okay.
Hey, man, we'll just go terminate. And you'll find out, oh, yeah, we'll fix this, we'll fix that, we'll fix this, we'll fix that. Great. We can do it.
What amendment?
There's an amendment to the contract. You talk to me first, okay? And then we'll get you the right verbiage. I'll let you know what you got to do and put in there. I'll tell you, put that in jointly. We'll do it. But I'm telling you, what you don't want is let 501 come and you have not done that. We've had situations where buyers thinking that they got this thing in the bag and they're going to get these repairs done. And the agents are up there like, now you're in a situation where you're hoping like, oh, I hope I get this thing from George. You don't want to be in that situation. Right? You don't want to be in that situation. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay. This ain't gonna be no walkthrough, huh? Damn. Okay. But this is good. Y'all need to know it. All right. So what else? I don't want to skip anything. It's based on the local time where the property is at. Right. So you have clients out of town and stuff like that. It's not on their time. It's the local time where the property is at. The option fee will not be refunded whatsoever. The escrow agent shall release option fee remaining with escrow agent to the seller at any time. The earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. Okay. C, which we're talking about. If buyer fails to deliver their earnest money within their time required, seller may terminate the contract or exercise the seller's remedies in paragraph 15 or both by providing notice to the buyer before the buyer delivers the earnest money. So here's another thing. This kind of comes into play. We're probably only going to do one page today. Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is critical. So let's say buyer does not deliver the earnest money on the 5th. Same scenario, July 5th. Seller wants to terminate. By that definition, they have every right to terminate. Okay. But the seller's listing agent don't send the termination to like the 7th. Meanwhile, the buyer turns in the earnest money on the 6th. If you look at this definition, it says by providing notice to the buyer before buyer delivers the earnest money. If you didn't deliver that notice of termination and the buyer slid it in before, the seller has no right to terminate. So make sure you understand that. We've had situations. Kia had a situation during Christmas last year, same scenario. And she was on the listing side and the seller wanted to terminate. They were back and forth, but meanwhile, the buyer got the earnest money in. So now the seller didn't have the right to terminate because the buyer got the earnest money in before they even got it there. The Kia had to go back and tell the seller, hey, we can't terminate. So all this stuff matters. You got to read the fine print and make sure you understand it to really make sure you're navigating this contract the way, well, in earnest of your client. Make sure what they're thinking is happening in the performance. These things are critical. All right. Time is of the essence with this paragraph. So any questions about block 5? I think we beat that one up pretty good. Okay, let's go on section 6. Title and survey. Now you'll notice title and survey is the longest portion of the contract. It's like a whole page and a half, right? We could probably be here forever, to be honest with you. But we're going to walk through this. Seller shall furnish to the buyer whoever's paying for title policy, all right, at the seller's expense or buyer expense. They should say title insurance policy. That's what they should say, right? It's basically what that is. And it's issued by usually the title company. That's all I'm going to say there for now. Whether seller or buyer, it's a market-driven thing. It is totally negotiable. Most times, it's going to be the seller. However, if we get a situation where you got multiple offers, several buyers wanting the same property, that may be the one thing that will push your buyer's offer to win. So just consider that. On the seller side, you're gonna be like, hey, do I have to pay that? I get that question all the time. No, you don't have to. But right now in this market, it's most likely that you will. That's how I'm going to answer the question. Most likely you will. Let's jump down here to 6A8. It says standard printed exceptions as discrepancies, and talking about the title policy. It's discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in the area, boundary lines, encroachments, protrusions, or overlapping improvements. So that's the things that they're talking about. If it needs to be amended or deleted from the title. The first one says will not be amended. The second one says will be amended to read whatever the shortages are. Now, here's the question. In the best interest of the buyer, it probably should be amended to read shortages in the area at the expense of the seller, right? But you're gonna have situations where it's not cookie cutter and seller's gonna know that there's some type of encroachment or there's conflicts or discrepancies in the title, right? And they're gonna sit there and say, will not. And if you check will not, that's the way this contract is gonna be performed. So if you're on the buyer side of that and you see that will not be amended, your spidey senses should go off. Like, why is that the case? You should immediately start to have some questions. If you go back and you go through the negotiations and they're like stuck on stupid, to have that is will not, that should be alarming. Now, it doesn't happen often, but you can get some properties with problems. Could be the difference in exchanging title because of the problems. The chain of custody or things like that is going to be really convoluted, right? So when you get in those situations, if you're on the buyer side of that, you should be trying to figure this out. Should be something big. I think we got a question here. Doesn't happen often, but when it does. Tanisha, you had a question? Tanisha, you there? The next one will be amended to read shortages in the area at the expense of what's negotiable. Best interest of the buyer probably will be the seller. Commitment B. It says within 20 days after the title commitment received of the contract, the seller shall furnish the buyer a commitment for title insurance, which is a title commitment at the buyer's expense. Now, here, it says 20 days. What are y'all seeing for title commitments coming out?
A week before closing.
Are you? Wow. Okay, I'm not seeing that. A week before close? Who are you closing with?
I don't know why.
Okay, that might be that might be a title company issue, or I don't know. But usually, I'm
out of town.
Okay.
At Dallas.
okay. Usually, I see them within about 7 days, about a week. Once you turn in the executed contract, the title, and they start doing the work, it typically takes about a week. All right. And if you don't have that on the buyer side of the house, you should be asking for it. Listing side of the house, you should be asking for it. Let's keep on going. Next one here says survey. Survey must be made by a registered professional land survey acceptable to the title company and buyer's lender. It must be acceptable to who?
The lender.
And the title company. And that has to be acceptable to the lender and the title company.
Okay.
The reason
Yeah,
I'm talking about this is because sometimes you'll get these surveys and they're old and decrepit and all this other stuff, and they're not in good shape and they're unreadable. If they don't accept it, then that's part of the contract and they have to accept it. It says here within blank days, the first block here, blank days, within blank days of effective date of the contract, seller shall furnish the buyer and title company the existing survey. This is, in my regard, I usually put 3 days here, okay? Because either you have it or you don't. And it comes down here, if you read a little bit more, it says if the title company or buyer lender does not accept that existing survey, buyer shall obtain a new survey at the seller's or buyer's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing. So keep that in mind. Those stipulations have to be in play. You get the existing survey within 3 days, you turn it into title, turn it to the lender, and they say, hey, we don't accept it, then the seller or buyer has to pay for it. In this market right now, most likely that's probably gonna be a seller expense. I have had situations where sellers who are pretty savvy, and they're like, no, I'm not paying for a survey because it's needed by the lender and the title company. And they'll say, hey, I'm not paying for it. Just keep that in mind. There's no right or wrong answer, but I have been in transactions where the seller says, no, I will not pay for the survey. Okay. Block 2, if you use block 2, it says within blank days after the day of the contract, the buyer may obtain a new survey at the buyer's expense. So if you're in a competitive situation, right, multiple offers, you might want to tell your buyer, say, hey, look, we'll just say we'll pay for it off the bat. We'll pay title and survey. Typically in COVID times, we were saying, hey, Mr. Buyer, you got to pay title, you got to pay survey, because that's the only way you're going to win these offers, right? Because most buyers coming in with, hey, they want the seller to pay title, they want the seller to pay survey. That's, if you think about it, a survey is about $525. We're $450 to $525, depending on if it's residential or commercial or land. If it's residential here, it's going to be between $450, $525. And then the survey, the title commitments could be $1,100 to $1,700. So that could be the difference in a seller seeing their net sheet saying we're gaining about $2,300 on this deal versus the other deal. Keep that in mind. And the last one, within blank days of the effective day, seller at the seller's expense shall furnish a new survey to buyer. Some lenders just require a new survey. If you know that, then you would start this one right here. Let's go D, objections. All right, usually it says buyer may object in writing to defects, exceptions, or encumbrances to the title disclosed on the survey other than items 6A1 through 7 above, disclosed in the commitment other than items 6A1 through 9 above, or which prohibit the following use or activity. Let's say you have a buyer who wants to buy a home, and later on they want to live in it first, but later on they say, hey, I want to have the ability to do Airbnb. The commitment may come out and say it's in the HOA and Airbnbs are not allowed. If that's what the buyer will want to do in the future, you would put Airbnb in that section. If they found out they couldn't do Airbnb, they would have X amount of days to object to that, meaning they would back out of the contract because they can't do Airbnbs. And in that case, they will be entitled to their earnest money back. Typically, the way I explain this to a buyer, if you found out there was anything you couldn't do that would stop you from buying it, park my semi truck in front of my house, on my grass. So you got to ask those questions, right? And that's where this comes into play. If they found out they were not able to do that thing or that activity, they wouldn't buy it. That's what I would put in there. The only way they would find that out is through the commitment coming out. The title commitment would outline the covenants and all this other stuff that they wouldn't be able to do. I had somebody say they wanted to make sure they could paint the house a certain color, right? So we put in there, hey, because they wanted to paint the house a certain color. We put in there, paint the house. He wanted to put like this green thing that he wanted to do. And we put in there, paint the house green. And if the commitment came out, says colors can only be this, then he would have been able to get out the contract and get his earnest money back. Okay, y'all understand? What have you seen?
The only thing I've seen is basically just for our community, we have investment-minded folks. So we want to be able to do Airbnb. We want to be able to do hospice. Some people are doing hospice in your neighborhood. And so we put that down. If I'm not able to do hospice and I find out in the 7 days, then I can terminate and get my money back. Whatever the investment situation is, mostly. And of course, that comes out in the title commitment.
So that's what that paragraph really is about. Let's jump to E.
How about home daycare? Can that be in there?
Yes,
It could
because
be.
and it may not fall into commercial zoning. The zoning may be wrong. That will definitely show up in the committee.
Here's if it's in a HOA or not, owners association, you would check yes or no, right? I'm not gonna spend much time on that. Required notices. The following notices have been given or are attached to this contract. For example, utility, water, drainage, or public improvement districts, PIDs. If it falls in that category, it's required to give notices at the time of the contract. Correct.
100%.
Okay. Let's keep on going. 7, let's break down 7, paragraph 7. And I'm gonna finish this paragraph. And we'll land the plane at this paragraph. All right. Okay. So 7 alpha. Talk about access, inspections, and utilities. Says seller shall permit buyer and buyer's agents access to property at reasonable times. I have found out in my way of doing this, reasonable times is like 8 to 8. However, I've been asked, what if my seller's okay with them coming at 6 p.m.? If it's reasonable to the seller, it's fine. Typically, we're talking about 8 to 8. All right, if you want some rule of thumb. Buyer may have the property inspected by inspectors selected by buyer and licensed by TREC. Okay, it doesn't say or, it says and. Everybody see that? What does and mean? I mean, it means to have selected by buyer and licensed by TREC. The reason I sat there and say that because you're gonna have people just buying houses and we're in El Paso, and they're like, "Oh, I can inspect it myself." Yeah, I can inspect it myself. Sure, but we also have to have a licensed inspector by TREC. This is going to be recognized. Do you have to get an inspection to sell a house? No. But for recognition of TREC standard, it needs to be the person that's licensed by TREC. You are going to have buyers that's going to challenge that. We're in El Paso. You got to come back to the contract. Say, hey, this is what the performance of the contract means. It says, or otherwise permitted by law to make the inspections. Now, any hydrostatic testing must be separately authorized by seller in writing. Seller at seller's expense shall immediately cause existing utilities to be turned on and shall keep the utilities on during the time of the contract is in effect. Okay, let's talk about that. I have not had any hydrostatic testing ever done in 10 years. If it ever happens, follow these guidelines. But the next sentence there about the utilities, it becomes an issue, right? It becomes an issue. Becomes an issue because sometimes seller are at distressed situations or they don't have the money or they're not living there. Or my last deal with Broken Bow, young kid, he's 34 years old. He ain't lived in this house in a year. Divorce situation, all this other stuff. He didn't have money to turn his utilities on. I don't recommend this, but I end up turning his utilities on and gave him money to turn his utilities on. I gave him like $450 to turn his utilities on. What do you think was in my invoice when we closed? That $450. I got that $450 back. I'm not recommending that whatsoever. But we got a contract so freaking fast. It was like, boom, we got to get this thing rolling. I had him sign, hey, you go pay me back and all this other stuff. That's one scenario. You could have scenarios where, help me out, George.
Repairs. So sometimes buyers and sellers get sticky. I'm not fixing that window. Buyer says, I ain't buying the house if they don't fix that window. Then I'll say, hey man, I'll give 150. You get 150. Let's get the window fixed because people get stuck on small stuff.
At the end of the day, you get back your $300, 150 and 150, correct?
It depends.
It depends. He did a smart thing with that, the utilities, and they charged him $450. I've spent money in my mind said, I'm already thinking, I'm gonna spend $300 to make $8,000. I'm okay with that.
You got to keep track of that. You got to keep your P&Ls tight. I don't always do that. There's been times where I'm like, no, But this situation, his sister, I knew his sister, she told me he was in a bad way. We talked. It was all these different things, the human element behind it. But even though the human element behind it, he still had to pay me at the end. Okay, let's go into this next thing. Utilities. Utilities is a huge thing because you have situations where sellers, you got a contract that's supposed to close on December 5th. Guess what happens? It's get extended to December 12th, the next week. And your seller's thinking, hey, I'm turning utilities off today. The contract doesn't say that. The contract says what? Shall keep the utilities on during the time the contract is in effect. And that's it. So what I tell sellers all the time, this is my verbiage. I explained a contract to a seller on Monday. And I told him, I say, hey, look, this is just a guideline, this date of December 5th or whatever. I've seen it close before, if that's possible. And I've seen contracts where they close 2 or 3 weeks later. But nonetheless, you're required to keep these utilities on until we close. And that's the way I explain it. As long as we're in contract, you're required to keep the utilities on. You need to explain it that way while you're doing the contract, because people will be like, oh, they'll, on 5th, I'm shutting the utilities off. I can shut them off on the 4th. No, you can't shut them off on the 4th. And I like to do a little courtesy too. You don't have to do this, but typically maybe the day after closing to turn the utilities off, to give that buyer time to switch them into their name. Are you okay with that? I'll have that conversation at the very beginning of the listing versus at the contract time. So I already got their mind kind of planning. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. But I've had sellers like, I'm shutting my stuff down on December 5th. Okay. All right. But just let you guys know. Let's keep on going. It says sellers disclosure pursuant to 5.008 Texas Property Code notice. Says here, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I'm going to do it for these guys. This one is pretty huge. Buyer has received notice. If the buyer says the key thing here, you can only check one. That is key. If the buyer has received notice, great. Usually, if you do it the right way, you hang that seller's disclosure inside the MLS. And that will deem necessary as the listing agent that you've given that disclosure. If you're the listing agent and you hung your seller's disclosure inside the MLS and the offer comes over with 2 checked, buyer has not received notice, then this paragraph is in effect. All right, it says within blank days after the effective date of the listing contract, seller shall deliver notice to the buyer. If the buyer does not receive the notice, buyer may terminate the contract at any time to the closing and receive the earnest money refunded if the seller delivers the notice. Buyer may terminate the contract for any reason within 7 days after the buyer receives his notice. So I explain this to say, if okay, you never got the seller's disclosure. Buyer never received it. It wasn't in the MLS. Buyer never received it. It's your get out of jail card, because if you ever do receive it, I don't care if it's 5 days before closing day. According to this, the buyer has additional 7 days and they can back out of the contract and get their earnest money back. I've seen new agents where they don't get the seller's disclosure and they're trying to chase it down. I'm like, I understand it. I got it. Because the buyer's harassing them. Hey, where's the seller's disclosure? Where's the seller's disclosure? Well, I'm like, you got the inspection. All right. Explain to your buyer, if they never give us this seller's disclosure, whenever we do get it, it leaves you another out to back out of the contract. Be careful if you want to explain that to some buyers, but keep that in the back of your mind and understand this paragraph. Some of the OGs in this business, they like new agents, new listing agents, because new listing agents don't send it over and they know this is in their hip pocket. They know they got that and they'll be able to get their buyers out of the contract. And then here, 3, the sellers is not required to furnish the notice under the Texas Property Code. There's 11 different categories. If it was under a government entity being sold by a trustee or under a court order, there's 11 situations where seller's disclosure is not required. If it falls under that, then you need to check this off. And if you're the listing agent and you receive this and somebody's checked these, you need to do your job and say, hey, look, I'm not required to have this. Okay. The seller's not required to have this. And check number 3. All right. You're going to be in situations where you're going to have foreclosure, court orders, estate sales. If you're not required to give a seller's disclosure, this is where you would check number 3. Hey, we're not required to have it. If you accept 1 and 2, you're going to have problems. All right. Let's keep on going. It says here, also here says about the lead-based paint. You need to have that, right? Acceptance as is means the present condition of the property with any and all defects without warranty, except for the warranties of the title and the warranties of the contract. Buyer's agreement to accept the property as is under paragraph 7.1 and 7.2 does not preclude the buyer from doing inspections on the property in 7 out. All right, you're going to have some buyers want you to write in this section. We've had buyers want this. Buyer accept the property as is, provide the seller expense shall complete the following repairs and treatments, and they'll want you to put in here subject to inspections. Don't put that in there because that's already written here in D. Everybody see D says, okay, it's subject to inspections or not subject to inspections, but inspections are allowed. But you're going to have buyers that demand you to put something in there like that, right? So don't do that. So most times you're probably going to check this, right? But there are going to be times where you're going to check this one right here. And it says, hey, buyer accepts the property as is, provided it is provided seller as the seller's expense shall complete the following specific repairs. I've seen things like this where people put at a situation where we walked in the house and some of the plaster from the ceiling was just hanging down. Or you walk up to the house and shingles are being blown off the house. You could put stuff in there like that. I'm just trying to think of all the other things I've probably seen.
Outside exterior needs to be painted. Basically, the buyer is eyeballing the house and said, yeah, I'm gonna buy the house, but they're gonna have to. This does not preclude the home inspection. The home inspection is gonna come out, you're still gonna negotiate those things, but he says, right off the top, this is what I can see. They're gonna have to paint that outside.
The whole thing about subject to inspections was so bad that they put it in the contract at the bottom. It says, hey, do not put that in there. I don't know how many times I still see it to this day. And it's written right there. Lender required repairs. Neither party is obligated to pay for lender required repairs. There's a perception or that lender required repairs is supposed to be paid for by the seller. But it says it's no obligation for either party to pay for it. It's totally negotiable. It's totally negotiable. It also says if the lender required repairs exceed 5% of the sales price, buyer may terminate the contract and Earnest money will be refunded to him. Okay. Questions about that one? All right. Completion of repairs. In short, completion of repairs, they got up until the closing date to get the repairs done. Okay. It also says here that it must be performed when a license is required. They got to be performed by a licensed professional. When I think of that, I think of roofers, electricians and plumbers. Structure stuff need to be structural engineer. You need to make sure you explain this to sellers because a lot of times sellers like a repairs come in, they're like, hey, I'll do it myself. If it's something that requires a license, you got to tell that seller, hey, you can't do that. All right. It's too late sometime because sellers just start doing stuff. Now, if we're talking about changing a doorknob or something like that, okay, cool. But if it's required to have a license to do the repair, you're supposed to have a licensed professional do it. The other thing about this is saying if the seller fails to complete any agreed repairs and treatments prior to closing, buyer may exercise remedies under paragraph 15 or extend the closing up to 5 days if necessary for the seller to complete the repairs and treatments. So we've had issues with this one in the past, and what we've had situations where buyer is not satisfied with the repairs. Okay. And the seller is saying, hey, I've done them. They're complete. Buyer is not satisfied. Now, that last sentence, it's subjective to some degree. All right. I would tell you when it's a licensed professional, that licensed professional should be the standard of what's fixed and what's not fixed. When we don't have the requirement for a licensed professional, there's where it kind of gets subjective. So be careful with those things. I'm not saying you're not going to run into those problems. A lot of times you're going to have to find some common ground.
Actually, can I share something? Because this just happened last night.
Okay.
And we're going back and forth negotiating repairs. And then the inspector recommended something. So we got the professional going to assess what was the inspector requesting, right? Which is what the buyer wanted. Anyways, I had to get
Pass the mic
my
back to her.
professional. I had to get my professional write it on my invoice that he completed. It was for the HVAC. The inspector requested to level, the HVAC. Anyway, so the professional went and looked and it say everything is okay with the installation. It has 3 safety features, so it's not needed. I had to send it in writing, and they had these agents send me a screenshot of Google saying that it was required. And then she referred again to the inspector.
Yeah,
And my response was the licensed professional,
yeah,
HVAC, did not recommend.
yeah.
So this is where my sellers are willing to do. I pretty much put it like, this is what they're willing to do. Because going back into license, the inspector, even though it's valid, they're there to do an inspection, but it's the licensed professional.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let my contractor battle it out with the inspector.
Sometimes when you get to those situations, I think the specialist trumps the generalist. Service contracts, home warranties. You're required by TREC to inform buyers of what a home warranty is and what it's not. Okay. And if you're going to have a home warranty inside the contract, this is where it's going to go. We have a couple examples of home warranties in front. I think there's a couple up there in front of you. And they specify what it covers, like the hot water heater, the garbage disposal, and things like that. What this is for is saying that the seller will provide these monies towards the home warranty. The home warranty is typically anywhere between $600 to like $1,000 now, right? And you would try and get this covered by the seller because it covers those items for 13 months or 18 months. That's what that paragraph is about. And if you're going to have the seller cover that from the buyer's perspective, that's where you'll put that amount in. And the buyer should be able to select their own home warranty company. So keep that in mind too. Okay, it's a lot covered, but probably needed. Who learned something today? Questions for me up to this point on anything here?
No, thank you.
No problem. And I'll expect you guys to remember all of this stuff. It takes time and time again. But if you should get to the point where you should know the right questions to ask if you get into certain scenarios. You should be like, oh, okay, I think I heard this before. Let me clarify this with Ben. Your job here is to learn this so well that you're able to explain it to your buyers and to your sellers. That's where you're add value. If you want to be able to add value to this whole process, you got to be able to explain this several different ways. It's going to take you reading this and understanding it. You should take a paragraph a week and study it. You may not know what it's talking about just yet, but you go get to situations where you will have the scenario and be like, okay, I remember this and I'm able to explain it. Unfortunately, myself or the dads can't be with you at that moment's notice when somebody's asking you a question. That's where we do it here, right? Because you're the person who's going to be the expert out there in the field, right? And you ain't going to have me right next to you, okay? So you got to be able to do that. Understand it, okay? Now I'm here. Don't get me wrong. You could be like, wait a second. Pick up the phone. I'll get on the phone and I'll start talking. Or you can call me. But in that moment's notice, you got to be explaining. You gonna say something, George?
No, I have a question.
So we had a car parked outside of a house that was belonging to someone else, and we're in the process of selling the house. It's been there forever, right? And we're getting down to the end of the contract. He wanted to get involved in trying to get the car moved. My first question is like, is it on the property? Is it, no, it's in the street. I was like, we do not want to get involved in that whole scenario. You leave that alone. It's on the public street. If it's on the property, it's a material fact about the property that we got to get involved in. But it's on the street. Leave it alone. And plus, I didn't want to go into the process of trying to get it moved because now we're into it. And let's say we got that car moved and whoever owns it, say we damaged it or whatever. So I was like, man, it act like it's not there. Now, if it was in the yard, that'd be different. We would have to address it. But if it wasn't, I had a situation where I had a car parked inside a garage and we came down to closing and the ex-spouse is fighting over this car. I had to deal with it because it's in the garage. And now I have a buyer to try and close on it. And we got a material fact about the house in the garage, and that was different. But if it's out in the street, something like that has nothing to do with the house, just act like you don't see it. I don't see no car. Where's that? I don't see it. Right? Okay.
Thank you so much.
It'll probably be.
See you at the party.
Equal to item 5.
Blue, black and gold,
What part are you talking about?
your party.
Oh,
I have a